Some crimes remain unsolved for years, with case files gathering dust in the archives of law enforcement agencies. Meanwhile, the perpetrators continue to live full lives and start families, unlike their victims whose lives were ruthlessly cut short. The killer in this story managed to evade the police for over 15 years, but justice eventually caught up with him. Rebecca Gault was born on April 28, 1982, in the small town of Melbourne, Kansas, USA, with a population of just under 2,000 people. She was the fourth daughter in the family. When Rebecca was very young, her parents began a rather unpleasant divorce process. Her father tried his best to win custody of his daughters, but the court sided with the mother, so the girls stayed with her. Despite all the life's hardships, the sisters maintained a relationship with their father, were close to each other, and took care of one another. When Rebecca became a teenager, she decided to enroll in a local community college in Arkansas. To be closer to her place of study, the girl moved to the city of Fayetteville, which had a population of about 100,000 residents. Here, the young student pursued her education while working part-time and preparing for her future university admission. Rebecca settled in an apartment with her younger sister Danelle, who was also her best friend. A few weeks after moving in, the girls decided to visit their hometown of Melbourne to see their family and friends. 22-year-old Rebecca, after saying goodbye to her loved ones, dropped her sister off at her boyfriend's house and went to see her own boyfriend, Casey. At that time, they had been dating for about a year. Casey lived in a trailer on a plot of land that belonged to his parents. The young couple had a great weekend together. Now it was time to slowly return to the usual work rhythm. On Monday morning, September 20, 2004, Rebecca drove her beloved to his job at a fast food restaurant. After that, the girl was seen at a store where she bought breakfast, coffee and a sandwich. Then Rebecca was supposed to pack her things to return home, where her sister, with whom they rented an apartment together, was waiting for her. But after returning to her boyfriend's trailer, the exhausted girl decided to take a nap for a bit, as she had barely slept all night. Around noon, Rebecca was supposed to pick up Danelle from her boyfriend's place, but she never showed up. The younger sister thought that Rebecca's plans had changed, so in the evening, she made her own way to their parents' house. There she gathered the necessary things before leaving and went to bed. The next morning, Danelle was waiting to meet her older sister, but she never appeared. The girl called Casey, but it turned out that he hadn't spent the night at home and knew nothing about Rebecca's whereabouts. The young man was sure that his girlfriend should have been home long ago. Other friends and acquaintances also denied seeing Rebecca. Hoping to find out what had happened to her sister, the worried Danelle called the sheriff's office. She reported that the girl had gone missing a little less than a day ago. The police immediately took an interest in this case. The investigators began to work out possible versions of what could have happened based on the information received from Danelle. After talking to her, the detectives decided to first question the person who had last seen Rebecca before she disappeared. The police visited Casey's workplace, as he was the last one to communicate with the girl. However, the young man told law enforcement that the night before, he had stayed at a friend's house, and in the morning went straight to work. He knew that Rebecca would be leaving with her sister, so he wasn't expecting her to return. However, the young man's decision seemed suspicious to the detectives. Moreover, Casey had a dog that needed care and which he could not leave alone for a long time. Although, in principle, there was someone in his parents' yard who could look after the animal. The police had no evidence to support their suspicions, but the investigators decided to inspect the trailer where the missing girl's boyfriend lived. They asked for his cooperation. When the police arrived at the scene, they immediately noticed Rebecca's car parked nearby. Inside the trailer, there was a strong smell of bleach. All of the girl's belongings were in place: her purse, money, cell phone, and even the coffee and sandwich she had bought that morning. It seemed as if the student hadn't even left. Her dog, a Pomeranian, which she couldn't leave unattended for long, was also there. In the bedroom, the police saw that the bed was very messily made. The comforter was crumpled up in the washing machine, with bloodstains visible on it. Next to the bed was a bottle of bleach. When the detectives looked under the mattress, they also found large fresh red stains on it. It was obvious that someone had recently flipped the mattress, trying to hide these bloody traces. After this discovery, the suspicions of law enforcement officers only intensified. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood on the mattress and bedding belonged to the missing girl. Casey instantly became the prime suspect in Rebecca's disappearance and her probable murder, given the amount of blood found in his home. However, several co-workers in Casey's management provided testimony that on the day of the disappearance, it was Rebecca who had dropped him off at work at 8 a.m. At that time, she was completely healthy and unharmed. After that, the girl went about her business and never returned. The young man worked until 4:30 p.m., and when his shift ended, his friends picked him up in a car. This fact was confirmed by several witnesses at once. Together with his buddies, Casey went to the movies for an evening show, and then they immediately went to one of the friends' houses. The tired young man went to bed and did not wake up until the morning of the 21st. From there, he went straight to the fast food restaurant where he worked. His friend also confirmed his words, so it seemed that Casey had a solid alibi and there were no grounds for arrest. However, the police still did not want to completely dismiss his candidacy. The investigators were forced to continue searching for evidence at the crime scene. All of the girl's things remained in the trailer, with the exception of her large travel suitcase. The police suspected that this was what the body could have been transported in. Another interesting detail was that the piano in the trailer was missing a leg. Casey explained that it had long been loose and would fall off if someone touched it, but he didn't know where it had gone. Perhaps it had rolled away somewhere, the young man suggested. Among the versions of Rebecca's disappearance, her escape with her ex-boyfriend Justin was also considered. The police contacted him, but he assured that he had not seen the missing girl and that they had not had any relationship for a long time. An active search for Rebecca began, and within a week the police received shocking news. On September 27, 2014, the body of 22-year-old Rebecca Gault was found in a ravine near the road. At that spot, there was a depression formed by an embankment, at the bottom of which a random witness came across the girl's body. The victim of the brutal murder was wearing only a t-shirt and underwear. During the autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the student had died about a week ago. This meant that it was on Monday, September 20th, after she had driven her boyfriend to work, that some criminal had attacked and killed her. Rebecca received 2 severe blows to the head with a blunt object. The first blow broke her nose, and the second was fatal, fracturing her skull. In addition, numerous bruises were found on the girl's body. She had been brutally beaten. Interestingly, the shape of the injuries exactly matched the trace of the broken piano leg, which was never found in the boyfriend's trailer. It was considered the murder weapon, but this piece of evidence could not be found near the body. The medical examiner did not find any traces of sexual intercourse, which meant that the girl was not expecting an attack. So she was dealt with by someone she knew, or she was attacked from behind. There were also no signs of rape. So this was not the attacker's motive. Among Rebecca's injuries, a fracture of the hyoid bone was found. This indicated prolonged and strong compression of the neck. After the body was discovered, law enforcement focused their attention on Casey again. Several witnesses reported that Rebecca had long intended to break up with him. The girl believed that it was her boyfriend who was the main source of problems in their relationship. His possessive behavior provoked the lion's share of quarrels, which only intensified when Rebecca moved to another city for her studies. However, Casey had an unshakable alibi. Nevertheless, the investigators and many residents of the town were convinced that it was he who had committed this brutal crime. After all, the murder took place in his home. The detectives really wanted to prove his involvement in this tragedy. Therefore, the police meticulously studied any information about Casey that they could get their hands on. However, at every stage of the investigation, his alibi was confirmed. Colleagues saw him at work. Then he was in the company of friends. There were tickets and receipts that proved it. The next morning, the young man appeared at work again and spent the whole day there. Given his alibi, he physically could not have done anything bad to Rebecca, whom he didn't even cross paths with that day. Unless he could have slipped out of work unnoticed. The detectives also considered this possibility. But they concluded that it was practically impossible. Casey worked in a fast food restaurant. He was constantly in the sight of other people. His absence would have been noticed immediately. There were suggestions that the attack on the girl happened not on Monday morning, but on Sunday evening. At that time, Casey did not have an alibi, but there were doubts here too. Witnesses claimed that it was Rebecca who drove her boyfriend to work in her own car on Monday morning. Moreover, after that, she even stopped by a store to buy breakfast. She was seen there too. The salesperson remembered how she bought a sandwich and coffee, which were later found in her boyfriend's trailer. This confirmed that the store employee was not mistaken. This version had to be quickly abandoned. Everything indicated that Rebecca returned to the trailer, and the attack on her happened there or somewhere nearby. This was evidenced by the fact that all her personal belongings remained in place. However, no signs of a break-in were found in the trailer. So the girl most likely knew her killer and opened the door for him herself. Or the door wasn't locked at all. Of course, when Casey managed to clear himself of suspicion, the police became interested in other members of his family who lived on the same property where the trailer was located. All of them could have had contact with the girl and seen her, effectively having unhindered access to the young man's home. But it turned out that the head of the family was not in town during that period. He worked as a long-haul truck driver and was making a run between cities. Casey's own brothers, Rebecca's boyfriend's siblings, also had alibis that were quickly confirmed. It turned out that none of his relatives who lived nearby could have attacked the girl. Meanwhile, the police continued to communicate with Casey, whom they continued to consider the main suspect, trying to find out new details about the last days of Rebecca's life. The young man confessed that on Sunday evening, he had met with his cousin, 27-year-old William Miller. He was passing by and stopped for a few minutes by the driveway to exchange a few words. It was a brief meeting, but the detectives were grasping at any lead. Everything indicated that the victim knew her killer, and it could have been anyone. Soon it became known that William had come to town to help his mother return from Texas. He arrived on the same evening and was there during the period when the girl disappeared. It all looked extremely suspicious. Could William have had some motive for committing the crime? To get more information, the detectives talked to this young man, but they couldn't find out anything new. He only confirmed that he had spoken with his cousin on Sunday evening, and then left and never saw Rebecca again. Another suspect was a certain Jenny Fortner, who had long been in conflict with Rebecca over her ex-boyfriend Justin. But this time, too, the police could not prove her involvement in the brutal crime. At the time of the murder, she had a solid alibi. While gathering information about the last days of the victim's life, the detectives learned that she had been communicating with a boy named J.B. Yates. They did not have a romantic relationship, but this young man had sold drugs to Rebecca, for which she owed him $20. The investigators assumed that he could well have been involved in the murder because of the money. But when they talked to him, he didn't seem suspicious. Yates assured that he would never have killed a young girl, even if it was about an amount that was many times greater than Rebecca's debt. He successfully passed a polygraph test and was released. Another person the investigators spoke to was Chris Cantrell. There were several witnesses who claimed that he had bragged about the murder of a young female student. Of course, the detectives immediately became interested in him. When he was interrogated at the police station, he denied these claims, and the witnesses with their contradictory statements could not be found. After checking Cantrell, he was released, as no evidence was found against him. In addition, he had an alibi. After that, the investigation reached a dead end. Despite public concern and pressure from the victim's relatives, the investigation stalled and did not move forward for years. All this time, Rebecca's parents constantly reminded about themselves and repeatedly demanded that the police give them access to the case file, but each time they were refused. They hired a private detective, but even he could not uncover new circumstances of this bloody crime. A reward of $25,000 was announced for information that would help solve the murder. But even that did not help the investigation. Only in the late 2010s did the situation move from a dead point. Several podcasts were released that told about the brutal crime against the girl. In 2018, another podcast dedicated to the unsolved murder of Rebecca Gault was released. The host, who was from the same area, invited relatives and friends of the murdered girl to talk. They shared their versions of what had happened. During a conversation with one of the interlocutors, a new fact suddenly surfaced. The witness claimed that he had heard with his own ears how Casey had boasted that he had killed Rebecca. According to this person, he had worked with the killer, and once, when he was very drunk, the young man confessed to the crime. But the testimony of this man raised some doubts. Firstly, Casey had allegedly confessed to the crime 8 years ago, while under the influence of alcohol. In addition, the witness himself was also tipsy at the time. And despite such shocking information, for some reason this person did not report what he heard to the police. There was a suspicion that the story for the podcast could have been just a way to draw attention to himself and have a minute of fame in front of the public. Moreover, it soon became clear that this man's wife had an intimate relationship with Casey. So it is quite possible that the witness simply wanted to take revenge on his rival. Be that as it may, this information forced the detectives to return to the investigation and take up the case with renewed vigor. In 2020, a special agent of the Kansas State Police received an order to resume the investigation into the murder of Rebecca. He decided to start from scratch. First of all, he interrogated everyone who could have been involved in this tragedy in any way. However, numerous conversations only confirmed the alibis of the suspects that had been established many years ago. The only person who did not have an alibi and was definitely in Casey's trailer shortly before Rebecca's death turned out to be his cousin William Miller. The police had spoken to him back in 2004, and at that time he denied any involvement in the girl's death. Since then, no one had been looking for William. As it turned out, over the past years, the man had managed to divorce his wife and move to the Philippines. There he had a relationship with another woman. Together they started a family and had 2 children. In the Philippines, William had a large farm of about 30 acres. The family raised livestock there and looked after plantations that helped them stay afloat. The couple's older son was fairly proficient in English, while their younger daughter knew only a few phrases, but spoke the Bisaya language fluently. William himself worked in the oil industry and taught at a school in Equatorial Guinea. The police suspected that the move abroad was actually an attempt to avoid paying taxes. After all, although William was an employee of a North American company, living outside the States, he did not have to pay taxes in his homeland. Thus, the man periodically traveled between the Philippines, West Africa, and the USA. He visited his homeland to see relatives, get medical treatment, and sometimes appeared at the office of the oil company he worked for. Anyway, the detective who took up this case really wanted to talk to William in person, because he aroused a lot of suspicion. Unfortunately, due to the suspect's constant traveling, it was extremely difficult to contact him. They had to be patient and wait for his next return to the States. The investigator intuitively felt that Casey's cousin could shed light on the events of 2004 and reveal new details of the brutal crime against Rebecca. Back in 2019, several journalists created a group on social media dedicated to this unsolved crime. Interestingly, William joined it fairly quickly. Of course, he had no idea that he was under the close attention of the police, because information about the progress of the investigation was not disclosed anywhere. William's name was not even mentioned in any of the podcasts, and none of the group members considered him a suspect. He was a little-known relative of Casey, with whom practically no one communicated closely. Therefore, people simply forgot about this person. But the detectives had long considered William as one of the likely criminals. On the day of the murder, he was in town for several days, helping his mother move. And in fact, he had access to the trailer. That's why the new investigator was so interested in this suspicious person. Moreover, the fact that shortly after the crime, William left the country, also led to certain thoughts. When the man suddenly joined the group on social media, it immediately attracted the attention of other members. The thing is, they knew almost everyone there, had their own close circle of communication. And William lived somewhere far away in the Philippines and could hardly know anything about those events. Therefore, his interest in this topic looked very strange. At the same time, the man demonstrated a surprisingly deep knowledge of the details of the murder. He seemed simply obsessed with this topic. William commented again and again on the circumstances of the student's death, sent newspaper clippings and witness statements. All this raised even more questions, because even the group members did not have access to such information. It was not yet known to the general public. The followers of the community recalled that William talked about the place where the girl's body was found, and also shared his suspicions about the involvement of Casey's neighbors in this case. This information interested other members of the group. One of the girls, who was well versed in genealogy, decided to dig deeper into William's biography. After analyzing the collected data, she found out that he was a cousin of the murdered girl's boyfriend. This discovery greatly alarmed everyone in the group. After discussing the situation, the community users decided to pass all the available information to the Arkansas State Police. This information seemed very interesting to law enforcement. The fact that William joined the group and constantly discussed the topic of murder was quite similar to the behavior of a criminal who closely monitors the progress of the investigation and tries to lead the investigation in the wrong direction. But the police had their hands tied, because the suspect was in another country, so there was no way to interrogate him. And although there was an extradition agreement between the United States and the Philippines, more compelling grounds were needed for extradition. All that remained was to wait for William to return to the States himself. In order not to miss his arrival, representatives of the U.S. Customs Service were informed and put on standby. The suspect's passport data was entered into a special database. It was assumed that when he crossed the border, customs officers would immediately receive an automatic notification and would be able to promptly inform the police. Eventually, that's what happened. In October 2020, William flew to Waco to visit his relatives who now lived in that city. The detective immediately learned about his arrival. When the police called William's mother, she assured them that her son had not appeared in the country for over a year. But this was not true, because the officers knew for certain that the suspect had already arrived in the United States. Later, the woman explained this lie by the fact that at first she did not believe that the police were really calling her. She allegedly decided that it was some ill-wishers of her son. In the end, law enforcement set up a meeting with William at the police station on November 7th. And he did show up there. Once in the interrogation room, the man immediately stated that he was ready to cooperate and would willingly provide the investigation with any necessary information. He said he had nothing to hide. Despite the fact that William was a suspect in the murder case, the detectives decided not to immediately focus on this. They started the conversation in a relaxed atmosphere, from afar, on innocent topics, to try to get the man talking and give him a false sense of security. At first, the investigators asked William about his current life and frequent travels. He willingly shared the details of his busy schedule and talked about his work. Gradually, the man relaxed and began to speak more frankly. The detectives began to take an interest in the suspect's work, his place of residence and daily routine at the time of the brutal murder of student Rebecca. Williams said that at that time he worked on a 7-day schedule of 10 to 12 hours, and then rested for the same amount of time. Shortly before the tragedy, Williams' mother moved from Arkansas to Texas, but she did not like it there and decided to return. The son used his free week to help with the move back to Arkansas. That's why he ended up in town when the murder happened. The investigators found out that William was not very close with his cousins, although he sometimes communicated with them. According to him, he had been to his cousin's trailer only a few times, but could not remember if it happened in 2004. The detectives tried to find out more about his meeting with Casey in September 2004. William confirmed that he had indeed visited his cousin when he was living at his mother's house. He saw little of Casey because he worked a lot. It seemed to William that there was some kind of quarrel between Casey and his girlfriend, although in fact the young people did not quarrel that evening, which was confirmed by all those close to them. The suspect admitted that he had been to his cousin's trailer more than once, but kept silent about the fact that he had communicated with him on September 19, the day before Rebecca's death. The investigators tried to lead William to a confession without revealing all the known information to him. According to the man, he only reached Arkansas in the evening of September 19, when it was already getting dark, and stayed with his mother. In the morning, together with her, he took his younger brother to school, and then spent the whole day packing things for the move. On Tuesday, William rented trucks. It was at this time that police officers with dogs appeared near Casey's trailer, but the suspect never mentioned seeing his cousin and his girlfriend. When the detectives told William that they knew about his meeting with Casey on September 19, he began to deny it, saying that he did not remember exactly and, perhaps, it happened at a different time. The investigators maintained a relaxed atmosphere and asked him to provide DNA samples. The man refused, explaining that his DNA could have been left on the furniture in the trailer. The detectives assured that they would not compare it with those samples, but with physical evidence from the crime scene, but they could not convince William. In fact, no DNA of the criminal was found at the murder scene. The police just wanted to check the suspect's reaction. At the same time, the man agreed to take a polygraph test. Before starting, he was visibly nervous, explaining this by taking medications that affect blood pressure and can reduce the accuracy of the results. Although in reality such factors do not affect the test, which he was told about. The polygraph examiner calmed William down, but it did not help. He failed the test, which increased the suspicions of the investigators. The interrogation continued. The detectives were going to crack the suspect, using the same tactic that they used on Casey in the first year after the murder. Then they photographed his car and tried to convince him that Rebecca's blood was found on the gas pedal. Of course, this was a lie to expose the criminal. The trick did not work with Casey, so the police assumed that the young man was really innocent. To repeat this technique with William, they had to track down and photograph his old pickup truck, which he owned at the time of the crime. When the investigators played out the same scene, informing about the allegedly discovered blood of the victim on the pedal, it worked. The man suddenly became nervous, began to stutter and get confused in his testimony, and his story instantly changed. Believing that Rebecca's blood had been found in his car, the suspect stated that on the day of the murder, he had seen an unknown young man in a white car near the house. He quickly left, so William thought it was a robbery. Running into the trailer to check this, he saw not traces of a robbery, but a bloody bed. In his opinion, the girl was attacked, kidnapped, and then killed. Of course, this version was not believed, because according to William himself, the criminal acted alone. Moreover, there was no reason to hide such information for so many years. When he was exposed in a lie, the man stated that he was ready to confess. He said that on Monday morning he went to the woods behind his grandfather's house. Knocking on the door of the trailer where Rebecca was, he asked to use the phone. Suspecting nothing, the girl let him in, but it was a trap. William wanted to hunt more interesting prey, and he chose the student. Nervous, the man accidentally touched the piano, from which a leg broke off and fell. Grabbing it, he brutally beat the girl to near death, and then strangled her with a rope to make sure she was dead. After the massacre, the killer packed the body in a suitcase, cleaned up the crime scene, took the bloody bedding, some of which he later sent to the laundry. Turning the mattress over, he took the corpse out in his pickup truck and threw it into a ravine. On the way, he even drove past the police station, not afraid at all that he could be noticed or stopped. On the way back, he got rid of the piano leg and the suitcase, later pointing out these places. The criminal simply continued to live as if nothing had happened. He returned home in such a way that his mother did not even notice his absence while packing things. Then they made the move as planned. The motive for the crime remained unclear. William denied any intention to rape Rebecca, and no valuables were stolen either. The man explained this by an uncontrollable outburst of aggression. The girl did not provoke him in any way, so there was no reason to kill her. He just wanted blood. The detectives were curious as to why the suspect did not flee to the Philippines when he arrived in the country and learned about the police call to his mother, but instead agreed to meet with the investigators. William admitted that he had been deceiving everyone about this case for so many years that he believed in his own impunity. He was not afraid of being exposed, so he calmly came to the police station to remove suspicion and live on. When the criminal was finally exposed, the investigators decided to use another trick. Suspecting that William might have other crimes behind him, they lied to him that they knew about it. Strangely, it worked. As it turned out, this family man was a real serial killer. According to him, he killed his first victim 20 years ago. Since then, he had always hunted for miniature pretty blondes, whom he beat and strangled to death. At the request of the police, William brought a map, marking 6 points on it where the bodies were supposed to be buried. 4 victims, according to his confession, were prostitutes, 2 were random girls. The FBI suggested that there could be 5 more murdered women, given the similar circumstances of their disappearance. According to the maniac, he never raped the victims, but chose prostitutes because of the ease of luring them and the fact that no one would look for them. William showed interest, waited for the girls to undress, and then attacked from behind and strangled them with their own clothes. After that, he refused to talk to the investigators in more detail about other victims, although he pointed out the places of burial and methods of murder. The searches yielded no results, the bodies were not found. It was also not possible to establish the identities of the deceased, because William was not familiar with any of them and did not know their names. Only his involvement in the murder of Rebecca was 100% proven. The criminal named many details known only to the killer and not disclosed by the police. In particular, he accurately pointed to the place where the suitcase was later found, and spoke about 2 blows to the victim's head. The piano leg was never found. In April 2022, as part of a deal with the investigation, the 44-year-old serial killer pleaded guilty only to the murder of the student. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the right to parole in 2068, when he turns 72. However, the possibility remains of proving William's involvement in other crimes that he told the police about. This case was quite controversial. Many people are still convinced that it was Rebecca's boyfriend Casey who killed her. But most of all, everyone is concerned about the question of whether William really killed other women and how many victims are actually on his conscience. So far, he has not been punished for other crimes. That's all for now. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Take care and goodbye.